get to that breaking news that we have this hour on the Israel-Hamas hostage and ceasefire deal. The Israeli government will convene today, really right now, to vote on the agreement. That vote now scheduled to happen this hour, and with that, Israel's full 33-member cabinet will set in motion a final countdown of sorts, as this is really the final hurdle to clear before we could see hostages released this weekend and a ceasefire setting in Gaza as well. Jeremy Diamond is in Tel Aviv, standing by, tracking all of this for us. He's joining us now. Jeremy, what are you hearing about all of this?
Well, okay, we actually have breaking news just coming in now from the Prime Minister's office saying that the Political Security Cabinet, which was the first stage of approval for the ceasefire agreement, that they have indeed voted in favor of this agreement, recommending that the government approve the ceasefire agreement that has been brought before them. The next stage of the process is for the full cabinet to vote on this, and we expect that that will happen within the next couple of hours. This whole process, after initially being delayed over the course of the last 24 hours, now appears to be on turbocharge, being sped up by the Israeli Prime Minister and his office in order to get all of these government approvals done today before Shabbat begins this evening, in order for this ceasefire agreement to be implemented on Sunday as originally scheduled. Last night there had been some concerns that because of what the Israeli Prime Minister's office claimed were some last-minute demands by Hamas at the negotiating table in Doha, but what we also know to be some political wrangling happening here in Israel, there were some concerns that the release of the first hostages, the exchange of the first Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, would be delayed until Monday instead. And so now things do indeed to be coming back on track, Kate. Once the full cabinet approves this agreement in the coming hours, as we expect that they will, the next stage of the process will be for the Supreme Court in Israel to be able to hear petitions arguing against the release of those Palestinian prisoners, hundreds of whom will be released in exchange for those 33 Israeli hostages. That process is largely pro forma. The Prime Minister and his government have extraordinary leeway to release those Palestinian prisoners for national security reasons. And so then we expect that this ceasefire will indeed come into effect come Sunday. It is important to note, though, Kate, that this war, until that ceasefire goes into effect, it is still very much raging inside of the Gaza Strip. More than 100 Palestinians have been killed since this ceasefire agreement was announced, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Dozens of children among those who have been killed, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. And so until that ceasefire agreement goes into effect, people's lives are still very much at risk. Kate?
Absolutely. Jeremy, let's stick with this breaking news, because this is a one step, but a critical one step towards what will set in motion what seemed confusingly in flux yesterday after the announcement of this deal being reached. But now that the security cabinet has voted in approval, it goes to the full cabinet you would assume then also gets approval. Is this then, how much question is there then how this unfolds going forward? Because that's the big concern. You've got a 42-day ceasefire to set in, and how much can happen to muck up the works in the meantime?
I think now that the Security Cabinet has voted, that the full cabinet is going to vote, there is really very little that can happen to take things off the rails at this point. As I explained, that Supreme Court petitions portion of things is really quite pro forma. We don't expect anything to come of that could derail this ceasefire agreement. That doesn't, however, mean that the Israeli Prime Minister's political woes have been entirely resolved, because as we've been watching over the last 48 hours, he has been facing quite an internal rebellion within his own coalition government from two far-right ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, and Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who have both been threatening to leave this coalition government if indeed this deal is approved. Ben-Gvir made very clear last night that he will leave the government if the deal is approved, which appears to be happening as we are speaking right now. So we expect him to leave the government. That will leave Prime Minister Netanyahu with only a two-seat majority in his governing coalition. As it relates to the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, he has been a little bit less unequivocal, I should say, in the sense that he has threatened to leave, but he has also said that the prime minister needs to provide assurances that Israel will return to the war in Gaza after the first phase of this agreement is concluded. And we don't know yet exactly what kinds of assurances the prime minister has provided, whether Smotrich will stick around through the first phase of the deal and then make a decision once those 6 weeks are up. What is very clear, though, is that the Israeli prime minister is under enormous pressure to go back to the war in Gaza once those 6 weeks are complete. And if he does so, that would be sabotaging what the United States and the Qatari and the Egyptian mediators have been trying to build in here, which is that this 6-week ceasefire would ultimately turn into something more enduring, would result in a permanent ceasefire and an end to the war in Gaza. If the prime minister listens to his far-right political allies here, he will be cutting that entire process short altogether. Kate.
Jeremy Diamond in Tel Aviv. Jeremy, thank you so much for bringing us the breaking news. John.
All right, we've got new reporting just into CNN. New details about Donald Trump's planned immigration crackdown in the very first hours after he is sworn into office on Monday. Sources tell CNN the plan includes targeted ICE sweeps in major metropolitan areas, including Washington, D.C., Denver, and Chicago. Let's get right to CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, who is on Capitol Hill. Priscilla, what's your reporting here? What have you learned?
Well, sources have described to me a slate of executive actions on immigration in those early hours of the Trump administration intended, again, to crack down on this signature issue for the president-elect. Now, they fall into three different buckets. Interior enforcement, so those ICE sweeps that you were talking about in those major metropolitan areas, of course, that have seen an influx of migrants over recent years. Also, those sanctuary jurisdictions. You've heard the incoming border czar Tom Homan talk about these a lot. These are areas that limit cooperation with federal immigration authorities. So that is going to be a target for them as they try to make a point on this very issue. And sources tell me that the intention here is to still focus on criminals, but of course, if they come across other undocumented immigrants, they too can be swept up. Now, the second bucket here is the border. So the border right now is relatively quiet. The numbers are very low, but all the same, they are planning to issue a national emergency declaration. This may sound familiar, to shore up Pentagon resources on the U.S. southern border and also add additional asylum restrictions. And the third bucket here is legal immigration. So the travel ban that President Joe Biden rolled back, well, an iteration of that is expected to come back. Exactly who would be part of this travel ban is still under consideration. Other things under consideration, for example, are also ending birthright citizenship. Of course, the strategy by the Trump team there is to tee up a legal fight on that very issue, which has been, was one that came up quite a bit during the campaign. So, of course, all of these actions are intended to create a dramatic shift in immigration policy that is going to affect immigrants nationwide, if not the world, John. Of course, as the president-elect tries to make do on his promise.
And again, this is all new reporting just in from Priscilla and her team. Priscilla, obviously, immigration regulation and oversight falls within the Department of Homeland Security. There are hearings that begin very, very shortly this morning for Kristi Noem to be Donald Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security. What do we expect there?
So she's the South Dakota governor. She was selected, as you mentioned, by the president-elect to lead the Department of Homeland Security. So during her confirmation hearing, you can expect that she is going to get many questions about the Trump immigration agenda. And so far, her meetings have gone pretty well, as far as we can tell, as far as the public comments from Republicans and Democrats, those meetings that she had behind closed doors. So we'll see how that plays out in public during this confirmation hearing. But we should note, John, that the power center for immigration policy is really going to be the White House with Stephen Miller, but also with the border czar Tom Homan. Of course, the first time around, Trump didn't have a border czar, so this is going to be different. And Tom Homan is an operator. He is a veteran immigration enforcement officer. So it's going to be interesting to watch that dynamic. But even so, Kristi Noem is going to be someone that, if confirmed, would be charged with implementing this agenda. So she is going to be a key player, even if the policy is made mostly out of the White House. So certainly senators will have many questions about how all of this is going to unfold in the days and weeks to come.
You bring up an interesting dynamic that is worth watching over the next several months, an extraordinary concentration of power inside the White House itself, really unprecedented. Priscilla Alvarez, thank you again for your reporting this morning.